All right, so you've all heard how we should eat, right? I personally believe vegan is one of the worst things that happened. I'll tell you why in a bit. But first, who am I to say that? I actually started in a butcher shop, studied physics, rocket science after that, worked in a few marketing roles in tech startups. And then our latest company is Epic Foods, as introduced, working with the dark kitchen model, but focusing solely on cooking plant-based takeaway foods now in the first 6 cities in the Nordics. And there's another thing that I really enjoy working and trying to get to the bottom of in food, and it's the psychology. So there's a heated discussion about what would be the best diet for humans between those vegans and meat eaters. And unfortunately, I think vegans aren't much helping it. The word is loaded with a baggage that comes with the lifestyle choices that are not food related, and that's why I believe that vegans have pretty much ruined the veganism for the rest of us, for the average eaters. Actually, what we've seen is that if you label your meal a vegan, you instantly lose 50% of the sales. They also studied this in Cambridge and Sainsbury's in London, having exactly the same dishes with slightly various names, and the vegan curries, as opposed to, say, mild and sweet curry, always lost half of the sales. So that's why I would like to suggest a better narrative, which is forget vegan, eat plants. It's called a plant-based diet, and technically it's exactly the same thing. And why I think it's important to kind of try to break through from the polarized discussion, which is like a trend in the world today, is it's a really healthy way of eating. Basically, it solves all of the massive food-related problems in the world today. It's the best for you, the planet. It's also most cost-efficient. There's just one major problem with plants. Have you ever really felt craving for carrots? Do you recall feeling the mouth-watering lust when you think about green beans? I didn't think so. Well, how about the pepperoni pizza? Coca-Cola marinated ribs? That makes you hungry, right? So what plants really lack is the taste. And unfortunately, that happens to be the biggest factor in food that we eat. And it's also the biggest hurdle when you're trying to get people to eat more of the plant-based proteins. So food is first and foremost about the craving. It also happens to be that the strongest memories that we make are flavors rather than what we've heard or read. So basically, the food tech companies are fighting against the best burrito in town, and if you are the second best burrito in town, you don't have much chance unless, of course, the best one is not available. So big food has always optimized for the taste. Unfortunately, the industrial food actually happens to be slightly poor in nutrition, so it makes you fat and hungry at the same time. Restaurant food only makes you hungry. Only makes you fat. So how would you compete if you wanted to work with these modern plant-based proteins? Well, I could try the education card, show you the impact of food industry on climate change, and what do you know, it's the second largest after energy production. But I hope you might already have seen Cowspiracy or Game Changers on Netflix. If you haven't, go look them up. A more personal approach to try to affect the diet would be the health angle. Maybe share a few bits and pieces about how the diet can affect the cancers, because a third of us is going to probably get it with the Western diet. This is quite interesting and often quoted study where they fed rats with a typical American diet of 20% of your protein coming from plant-based source, in this case milk, which is basically the perfect growth protein, because milk was designed by nature to grow the baby cows to be adults. But when you feed it to adults, you actually feed your cancerous cells. When you decrease the 5% plant-based diet, actually you see the cancer growth even reversed. But this is a somewhat controversial study, much like health effects of tobacco were controversial in the 80s. So we are looking for even kind of more practical ways to affect what you eat. And this is what we've figured out. So if taste is the key and plants suck at it, we better focus on the flavors of what we are cooking instead of actually the protein source. So we take very traditional everyday dishes and basically hide the fact that they are not made from meat. So instead of barbecue strips, you have barbecued sweet potato or Asian teriyaki, and people basically get the craving because they imagine the flavor, and its actually taste is really, really good, like you would expect barbecue sauce to taste. So accidentally vegan, you don't use it in marketing, but it's an engineering design feature for the food to make the best food that, according to all of our research, we think we should be eating. And a lot of people are starting to think the same way. So here are the school strikes for climate a year ago and a year later. Past fall, I've discussed with several culinary heads of IKEA, Hilton, Sodexo, and everyone referred last fall as an avalanche of plant-based meal requests. So there's a lot of bubbling ongoing, and I think the food tech community owes it to these people to not make the shitty lab-grown foods, but actually combine it with really good French chefs and make them taste better than the neighborhood kitchens. And when we get that right, the reward is basically this market, which is growing double-digit, the flexitarian people like me. It's actually an unprecedented change and speed of change in the history of food. So now that we've established what we should be eating in the future, let's see one angle to how it's being made, the dark kitchens. Obviously, just a small part of the food value chain, but something that we are quite familiar with at Epic Foods. So, food delivery 1.0, picking up a phone and calling a pizza. Food delivery 2.0, Glovo, Bolt, Volt, Uber Eats taught us that convenience is king, and they familiarize us with the perfect user experience for ordering food. Now, food delivery 3.0 will be working the back end of that food production, so actually you can get the food really fast and it will be super healthy and tasty. So if the forecasts of the UEBS are anywhere near, the food market will still grow tenfold in the next decade. There's a few interesting implications when that happens. Restaurants can't really invest to keep up with the growth. In fact, the restaurant owner business model starts to break when about 30 or 50% of your orders comes through delivery, because the delivery companies take such a high margin that you can't invest to hire more staff or increase your premises. Also, something that is already happening is that the retailers are not just standing still while tech companies here are eating their meals. So basically a lot of supermarkets are starting to set up these restaurants. And that will lead to the need of having more and more kitchens, not to forget that the actual time that millennials spend in kitchens has already dropped to half, even in markets like France. So we are really not cooking so much at home anymore, and that's why I think dark kitchens will play a part in the future food. And dark kitchen actually has a chance to fix the most deadly or dangerous pitfalls of a traditional restaurant model. First of the pitfalls of a traditional restaurant model would be the choice of location. You get to pick once and you stay there for 10 years. My friend who has started a lot of restaurants has this rule that he goes to a potential location and lights a cigarette. And while he's smoking that cigarette, he counts the people that walk past that location, and he needs to get to a minimum of dozen people, otherwise the location is too silent to have a restaurant. That's one of the most technologically advanced ways of looking at it in a restaurant world. Something that's even more interesting is that in food, you could never do two kitchens from the same location. So you could never do hamburger and a salad or pizza from the same restaurant. It's just not psychologically credible to do so. In all the other industries, cars, drinks, you use the same assembly lines to manufacture Audis, Volkswagens and all the other cars. Huge leverage and advantage. So the internet will change this as well, because you can actually use very well the same kitchen to cook both pizzas and burgers and salad, as long as they are separate selections on your food delivery app, and you are under the impression that this is probably the guy who is making the best pizza in town. But if you walk into a physical restaurant, they also serve burgers, you don't believe that the pizza will be that good. The last point there about building small local brands at scale, there was an Indian food company, Rebel Foods, and their founder wrote an interesting blog post about how you also never in a physical world say that that small sweatshop at the end of the block makes the best smartphones in the world. Small can't do that, but in food the small is big, so you frequently say that the shitty restaurant across the block makes the best burritos in the world. And the dark kitchen is the way to scale that shitty, clumsy, rugged restaurant to the whole city, to the whole neighborhood, to the whole country. So building the small local brands at scale. There are a few major kind of setbacks to overcome with the dark kitchens also, how you build brands online. But if you overcome these, you can basically like have 5 restaurants with one investment or 50 restaurants with one investment, and that's a really game changer. And we've actually taken a systems view to the food industry at Epic Foods. So we've managed to solve a lot of these inefficiencies that there are in food value chain. You think that the food is efficient, but supermarket itself is inefficient, but it's totally separated from the supplier of the food, so no one or a few people are actually thinking kind of holistically the whole value chain, which the dark kitchens can do, and that means that you optimize all of the steps from sourcing, menu planning, seasonality together, and you can actually hit a really nice margins. Actually, do you know that when you order a 10 euro meal, how much of that 10 euro that you spent went to actual food stuff? It's not that much, 2 to 3 euros. So it's just a fraction of that. All the else is fixed cost. That's what the technology can change. And then what do you think that would be the biggest cost in that 10 euro meal that you ordered home? The delivery altogether. Which is why I'm really excited to follow what's happening on that front with the automation. Uber Air is making a way for the food delivery drones to land on the car roofs of the nearest Uber car, so you still have like a human making the last mile. We are also counting a lot to pickup stations, which from the previously shown kitchen serve over 1,000 meals a day in the Helsinki area. And this year we are starting to fill up the pickup stations with airborne drones as well. And that means major changes in the food value chain. And I would like to leave you with an analogy on that one. So if we would have met 100 years ago here, and I would have told you that, by the way, this sweater that I'm wearing was not made by me, all of you would be like, no way, the guy's crazy. We all had made our own clothes 100 years ago, and the skill of knitting was very common at homes before the value changed and made it inefficient to manufacture your own clothes at home. So the food industry within the next 10 years is not far from that situation. We are just aiming to make that transformation way more sustainable than the clothing industry actually was, with the plant-based food delivered on a totally different back end made possible by the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Martti. Thank you, sir. Just a quick one before we head off. So how do you feel then, I mean, I get there's delivery services, then you're providing the back end. Where does meal kit services fit into this? And is there, I mean, you've just told us, no one wants to cook, no one's cooking, are you stupid? Where do meal kit, because they haven't really kind of penetrated our markets around here. Talk about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, good question. So I think there are more like lasting solutions and then intermediary solutions, which I consider meal kits to be. So if you never learned how to cook at home, it's a fun way of learning it, and it will probably stay around in some markets. I mean, it's HelloFresh is a billion-dollar company, not in valuation revenues. But ultimately, what I believe is that convenience will always win, so there will be more markets to a ready-made solutions, and the meal kits would more be like a hobby for you for the weekends.
Why do you think those meal kits haven't really, because I mean, I don't know if there's many in Estonia or even in the Nordics. Why do you think our markets, Eastern and Northern Europe, haven't really taken to meal kits like, I mean, Americans love it. They love that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Might be that the meal kit company founders would be better at answering this. Okay. I know that close to 80% of the people in the Nordics actually say that they would prefer not to cook at home if that was possible.
Right.
So we actually don't enjoy it that much.
Interesting, some cultural differences. Very good. We need to carry on, but thank you very much, Martti. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.